video, I'm going to teach you how to use font families to create interest and hierarchy. We're going to see how to see the size and options of a font family, how to apply a font family to a portfolio to convey hierarchy and organize information, show how the font size or point size of fonts can vary, and how fonts can convey tone. So on our portfolio template, you can see here that when I click on this text box and I go over to the Properties tab, it gives me information about the font in here. And so you can see this is the name of the font. And there's some information about the color as well. But what I want to draw your attention to right now is that if I double click on this and I go to change the font, I can click here in a drop-down menu and it shows me all the fonts that are loaded within InDesign. And you can see here right next to the font name, we've got a sample of the writing, of course, so I can see how it looks. But what's really important here is the number that's within this parentheses set. Now, I selected this font for our portfolio template because this number is very high. You can see here there's, as we scroll down, there's some with 6s and 4s, and that number indicates how many options are within the font family. And so let's go back to selecting our font, and we see it's got 12 options in our font family. And if I look down here and I hit the drop-down menu, the 12 options are right there. And this is really helpful because it's going to show me all the different ways that I can represent and use this font to convey hierarchy within my template. And so you can see here, I have selected this font and it's got 12 different options here. So now let's take a look at my page. So if we talk about the hierarchy of information, that refers to which information is more important or most important, and then which pieces of information may be less important than others. So the most important piece of information here is the name of the assignment. And the reason I can tell that is because it's the largest and it's in the top left corner, which when we read documents, we read them like a book. So top to bottom, left to right. So the largest font here indicates that this is the most important information. And so that's by design. You can see here that kind of secondary to that information is smaller font in italics, and it's just below this, and that's because this smaller italicized font is qualifying or giving information about what's written up here, and that's why it's smaller. It's the same font, notice, but it's in italic, and it's about half the size. So this is 36 point, this is 18, so it's about half the size. Now, once you know that this is a perspective drawing assignment and we're doing 1-point perspectives by hand, now the next level of importance is really kind of tied between these two. This comes next when we read it like a book, but this is darker and it's bolder and it's a little bit larger in size. So these are kind of tied based on hierarchy. So it forces the viewer to choose which they want to read first. And that's also by design. And so if the viewer wants to see this and say, okay, well, this is skill building, that's important, definitely, because this assignment is talking about that we are building skills. And how are we building skills? Well, this is how we're doing it here. So they are kind of tied as far as information goes. You can see here that this assignment description is also in italics because it's really qualifying this even further. A little bit smaller in size, you can see it's 15-point font, and you can see here this one is about the same size as this, but it's bold, and that's because, again, they're conveying different pieces of information. Notice it's the same font family, but I'm using size to manipulate as well as the boldness and whether or not it's italicized to convey information. Let's go ahead and look at another page. You can see if I go down here, I've got some labels here. Now, the same hierarchy is in place that we already saw, but you can see here, I've got text in the lower left-hand corner of each of these images, and the text box is in the same spot relative to each image for all of these. Okay, and I planned that, I moved that, I made sure that the grips of the text box aligned with the grips of the image box. But notice it's not italicized because I want it to be really easy to read. And also, this font is very small. It's at 12 point. Let's check. Oh, a little bit. It's at 11 point. So this is a very small font as far as size goes. So I didn't want to add anything to it like italicizing it or making it bold because it's the least important with regard to the hierarchy, but because it's so small, I don't want to add anything to it that's going to compromise the ability to have it be read. Now, I wouldn't go any smaller than 11 point font because if you print this out, anything much smaller than 11 is going to be very difficult to read. So just keep in mind that once you have your font family selected, go ahead and play with or manipulate the different types of the fonts to convey that sense of hierarchy. One other thing I want to talk to you about before we move on is I want you to notice that font sizes are not necessarily consistent. Right here, we have an 18-inch font, and you can see it's 18 point if I double click on here. Oh, pardon me, 15 points right here. So if I go ahead and copy this text box, so if I hit copy and V paste, you can see here that the way that I selected here, I just double click inside, and let's say I switch to a different font. Let's see what Centaur looks like. Notice how Centaur at 15 points is much smaller than this Seagull at 15 points. So just be aware that if you jump between fonts, you may have to adjust the size of the font so that it looks more consistent with your template example, okay? The next thing that I want to do is show you how fonts can convey tone. And so I'm going to go ahead and just delete this really quickly. And I want to look at my font choices again. Now, you have to be really careful because once again, less is more when it comes to fonts. You really don't want the font to take away from the image. The image, of course, is primary and the font is secondary to that. But I want you to just kind of be aware that as you scroll through fonts, be mindful that the ones that you are drawn to, you may be drawn to them because you see them all the time. And that may be an indication not to use that font. For example, a lot of people use what we're going to see here, which is papyrus. And that's because it's, a little bit unique, but it's still easy to read. It's got kind of a little twist to it, but it's very, very common because of this. And you can see there's no families in this font. It's just the only thing you can control is the size of it. Okay, if you select a font like this, it's very traditional, but it's a little bit difficult to read. If you select a font that's got what we see here at the bottom of or at the ends of the letters, this is called a serif. And fonts with serifs are a little bit more traditional, whereas sans serif fonts, ones that do not have those, like you can see, for example, let me scroll up. You can see this is a sans serif font, and those are a little bit more contemporary. So just kind of keep in mind there's fonts that are cursive, which are a little bit difficult to read. Fonts that have a little bit more of like almost a Gothic feeling to them convey a sense of tone. You can see that there's ones that are a little bit more playful, which would again maybe signal kind of a sense of playfulness or childlike sort of feeling within your portfolio. There's some that look a little bit more like hand drawing, which can make a portfolio seem a little bit more casual, which certainly has its purpose. Okay, something like this, immediately evokes feelings of sort of neon signs from the 70s. And so just use these wisely. Make sure that you are considering that not only do you have a reaction to your font, and maybe that's why you like it, but other people will have reactions to your font as well. They may like it because it's got a little bit of personality, or they may find it hard to read or a little bit distracting. So start to pay attention to the fonts that you see out in the world that appeal to you, the use of font families, font sizes, and hierarchy with regard to italics and bold use in fonts, and see how that is conveying tone and guiding the viewer at what to look at first.